guys, so we're continuing with our discussion of embedded clauses, and the first type of embedded clause that we have been talking about is an embedded clause that serves as the complement to a main verb. So we say that that is a verb complement clause, and this is the most common type of clause that's in embedded clause that we see in English. We have many, many other types. We're just going to focus in on this one. So for example, when you have the teacher claimed that John had left the room, the way in which you're going to approach any embedded clause structure will always be the same. The first thing that you want to do is identify what is the main clause, right? So the main clause, as we know, is going to be comprised of everything within the whole sentence. So our main clause here is, the teacher claimed that John had left the room. And then we start to look at what's going on inside of this sentence, and we realize that within this sentence we have another element that seems to be functioning as a sentence itself. Because when you have John had left the room, we know that that could have occurred on its own as an independent sentence. So you could have said in a conversation, John had left the room, so Mary walked in. Something like that, and John had left the room would be its own independent sentence. So that's telling us that our embedded clause here is John had left the room. And remember that an embedded clause is exactly the same as a main clause, except that it's occurring within another sentence. But the internal structure of an embedded clause is going to be identical to the internal structure of main clause. So John had left the room is our embedded clause, and then we talked about this word that. Remember the complementizer that. In English, generally speaking, you can either have it or not have it. Generally speaking, you can leave it out if you want. You can just say, the teacher claimed John had left the room. Or you can say, the teacher claimed that John had left the room. Either way, it doesn't make a difference in meaning. You're still expressing that the thing that was said, the thing that was claimed was John had left the room. So we're going to mark this guy as complementizer, and it's always going to be that word in English. That is the only complementizer that we're going to take a look at in this course. So number one, you want to first identify the embedded clause and provide the structure for the embedded clause as if it were a main clause. So you're forgetting about the rest of the structure of the sentence, and you're just looking at that embedded clause part. So when you have John had left the room, if this were a main clause, you know what you would do. You would say, okay, I'm dividing this up into subject and predicate. So your subject would be John had left the room, would be your predicate. And then we know that in terms of the structure of the sentence, that would be expressed by saying that we had a sentence made up of the noun phrase subject, which is John, and the verb phrase predicate, which is had left the room. Keep in mind that for all of the structures that you provide, all of your tree structures, the only material that you're going to have above the words of your sentence will always be phrases. So you'll have verb phrase, adjective phrase, noun phrase, and sentences. However, you will never have within the analysis of the sentence, the tree structure, something like indirect object or direct object. Those are explaining what the meaning of that particular phrase is in the sentence. So if you say John had left the room is a noun phrase, and that information would be here. And the fact that the room is the place that was left makes the room into a direct object, which tells you the relationship between the meaning of the leaving and the room. So you could label that underneath direct object. But keep in mind that you never want to have in your tree structures anything that looks like direct object, indirect object, prepositional complement. All of those items are what we call grammatical relations, and you can express those under the structure of the sentence. But the structure of the sentence is always only comprised of phrases. different types of phrases. So we have this embedded clause, John had left the room, and then we have this complementizer, that. And remember we talked about, well, what are we going to do with this complementizer? Where does it go? It doesn't seem to fit in with the verb group that appears before it, because claim does not require the complementizer, that. You could have said, the teacher claimed John had left the room, and that would have been a perfectly fine sentence. So, or you could have said, the teacher claimed the truth, or something like that. We would have something other than an embedded clause as the complement to the verb here. So when you have that John had left the room, the word that is introducing the embedded clause, John had left the room. And therefore, it's serving as an indicator of an embedded clause is coming up, basically. So we said that it's forming a part of the embedded clause, which we were calling S bar, which is the idea that you have, in addition to your regular sentence that is serving as an embedded clause here, this material that is extra, which is this complementizer, and that is forming a unit. Those two things are forming a unit together. And the unit we call S bar. Okay, so then we think about what is going on with claim and that John had left the room. The thing that is claimed is that John left the room. So the idea is that claim is taking as a complement that John had left the room. Therefore, we're going to have exactly the same structure that we would usually have whenever we have a main verb taking a complement of any type. That's always the same structure. Why? Because it's the verb group comprised of that other unit and forming a verb phrase. That's going to be true whether we have a direct object, an indirect object, object predicative, subject complement, whatever is going on there. Those two units, the verb group and that other thing, will always form the verb phrase. And then we have the teacher. What is the teacher doing? The teacher is the subject of the whole main clause, right? The teacher is the one who claimed that John had left the room. So the teacher is going to be our main clause subject and is going to form a unit with this whole predicate, which is the main clause predicate, and is going to form the sentence, which is the main clause. So if you wanted to point out the main versus the embedded clause here, we say that this guy is the main clause, right? It includes everything. And this guy, this S bar, is our embedded clause. Because it includes all the material that is part of the sentence within the sentence. That's always what an embedded clause is, a sentence within another sentence. Okay, so we have many verbs in English that will allow you to have a structure like this. We can say the teacher claimed that John had left the room. The teacher complained that John had left the room. The teacher screamed that John had left the room. The teacher forgot that John had left the room. So there are many, many verbs that will allow this type of structure, but of course not all verbs do. Just as all verbs in English won't take a direct object or won't take an indirect object. They have to be of the right sort. So if you said, the teacher fainted that John had left the room, this would just be like, what are you talking about? How do you compute the meaning of that expression? Because fainted is, we know, an intransitive verb, which means it cannot take any complements, not just a direct object or an indirect object, or those other types of complements that we've been talking about, but any type of complement at all, including an embedded clause. So the idea is that as long as you have a verb which allows you to have an embedded clause, you're going to have always basically this same structure for embedded clauses. We have the verb group forming a unit of the verb phrase with the embedded clause. If you have a complementizer present, that's forming a unit with the embedded clause to form the S bar, what we call the S bar. So the S bar you can think of as being the additional structure on top of the embedded clause. The embedded clause being the first S, and then the S bar is when you have the complementizer present. Okay, so let's take a look at the second type of embedded clause that we have in English. We said that we're going to talk about three basic sorts. Main verbs taking embedded clauses, adjectives taking embedded clauses, and when you have the subject of a sentence actually being a clause. So those sentential subject. So let's look at the second sort, adjective embedded complement clause. So essentially what's going on with this type of structure is that you have an identical structure to the one that you had with the main verb. What's happening with the main verb? The main verb, of course, is part of the main clause. The subject of that main clause has as its predicate the main verb, which takes, in turn, the embedded clause as its complement. And that's basically what's going on when we have an adjectival structure as well, except that instead of the main verb taking the complement clause, it's an adjective that takes the complement clause. But we're going to see why we want to say that that embedded clause is related to that adjective. So for example, if you say something like, I am upset that the heat is not winning. Okay, so I am upset that the heat is not winning. What is going on here in terms of, are you going to analyze the whole structure? You know that the whole structure is always going to be your main clause. So you're going to mark off, I am upset that the heat is not winning as your main clause. And the next thing that you notice is that within this main clause, you have a sentence that could have occurred on its own. You could have said, the heat is not winning. That would be a perfectly fine independent clause. So the heat is not winning could be considered to be an embedded clause. So the idea is that notice what we have here before this embedded clause, that the heat is not winning. Another instance of our complementizer. So we're going to label this complementizer. And we know that the complementizer is going to form a unit with the embedded clause to form an S-bar. That's going to be always exactly the same. So if we were providing the structure for the embedded clause, the heat is not winning, exactly the same as any clause that you would ever have. You're going to have your sentence divided up into your subject and your predicate. The heat is the noun phrase subject, is not winning, is the the predicate of the sentence, the verb phrase. We have the word that complementizer that we could leave out sometimes, and so together these two guys are going to form an S-bar. Now, notice what's happening here in the rest of the structure of the sentence. So we have, I am upset that the heat is not winning. What is the item that is occurring before that the heat is not winning? Upset. Well, upset can be many things in English, right? It can be a noun, it can be a verb, it can be an adjective. So how do we know how it's functioning in this sentence? For example, you could say, I upset the children. I upset the children. It means I made the children upset. So I upset the children. In this example, what is the role of upset? The role of upset is as a verb because the children is the direct object and upset is the main verb taking this direct object. So who is upset? The children are upset. So the idea is that, and for example, you could say, if somebody said to you, I'm upset that the heat is not winning, somebody else might say, wait a minute, there's going to be an upset. We're all hoping for this, but let's see whether this is in fact true. So there's going to be an upset. Why do we know that this instance of upset is functioning as a noun? Well, we have a determiner and indefinite determiner coming before it. So this guy can function as a noun in this instance. It can be a noun, it can be a main verb. What is it doing here? That's the important thing. What role is it playing in this sentence? So become very familiar with having those tests ready to know whether you have, for example, something as a verb or something as an adjective. And we said that if we have something which is an adjective, typically it can be intensified. And so what are some of our intensifiers in English? Very. So I am very upset that the Heat is not winning. Or I am extremely upset that the Heat is not winning. Both of these serve the same function. They're both telling you that the upsetting mood is very strong, right? Have a high degree of feeling upset. In other words, that is giving you the indication, since it occurs with a degree word like very, that you're dealing with an adjective in this example, not a verb. So, upset is an adjective, and when you think about I am upset, that whole thing is going to form a verb phrase. If you just had, so forget about that Heat is not winning, I am upset. Am would be the main verb, and it would form with this adjective phrase, the whole predicate of the sentence. I would be the subject of that whole sentence, and together they would form a sentence. So, what's going on that's different here? What is the thing that makes you upset? What's the cause of your being upset? Is that the Heat is not winning. So that's why we say that the Heat is not winning in this sentence is a complement to the adjective. In other words, it's the thing that is creating the mood of being upset. So because of that, we're going to say that in this instance, upset as an adjective is taking the embedded clause as its complement. And therefore you're going to have, therefore you're going to have an adjective phrase comprised of the adjective upset plus the complement clause that the Heat is not winning. So whenever you have something that is typically occurring with the main verb be, so I am upset, I am angry, I am sad, I'm depressed, I am this, I am that. When you see that main verb be, you already know, this is probably going to be a subject complement following this. It could be the beginning of a progressive sequence, so it could be I am leaving the room. Now leaving the room is serving as the second half of the progressive with the verb be there. But if you have something other than a verb following the verb be, typically that's a subject complement. So I am the boss. He is the leader. Something like that. Those guys are both functioning to modify the subject of the sentence. And this is the same thing that we have here with this adjective phrase. This whole adjective phrase, upset that the Heat is not winning, is telling you about the subject of the sentence, I. It's modifying the subject of the sentence. So, am is going to be the only member of your verb group here. You're going to have this structure, and therefore that verb group plus the adjective phrase is going to be your verb phrase. And then the subject of the main clause, I, is going to form a unit with that verb phrase to create the whole sentence. So we have the whole sentence, the whole main clause, subject is I, and the main clause predicate is am upset that the Heat is not winning. Within this predicate, we have an embedded clause comprised of the Heat is not winning. You know that that's an embedded clause because you could have just had it occurring by itself. And therefore, we're going to provide the same exact structure for the Heat is not winning as for any sentence. Subject, predicate, noun phrase, verb phrase. That we discovered is a complementizer. It's something that introduces a complement to a verb or an adjective. In other words, it's saying that what we have coming up here is not a direct object, it's not an indirect object, it's not a prepositional complement. It is an embedded clause. It's signifying that what is coming next is an embedded clause. So upset, we said here, is functioning as an adjective, although it can be a verb. It can be a verb. She upset the apple cart. In that instance, it's definitely a verb. But notice you can't say she very upset the apple cart, right? Because very, as a degree word, cannot modify a verb. So since you can say very, I am very upset that the Heat is not winning, very is telling you that upset is serving as an adjective here. So the adjective plus the complement clause together form the adjective phrase, which is the complement of the verb group, which is made up here just of the word am and then the subject of the main clause is joined together with that to form a whole sentence. So the idea is that basically you have the same structure when you have an embedded complement clause that starts with an adjective as you have when you have an embedded clause that starts with a main verb. The structure is basically the same. It's either a verb phrase with the verb taking the complement embedded clause, or it's an adjective phrase with the adjective taking the embedded clause and forming an adjective phrase. So let's look at a few more examples of adjective phrase structures where you have embedded clauses, and then we're going to talk about the examples where you can have an embedded clause actually within the subject position itself of the main clause. So, for example, if you said, John is jealous that Maritza won the prize. Okay, John is jealous that Maritza won the prize. What's going on here? We know that we're talking about this in terms of embedded clauses because Maritza won the prize could itself be an independent sentence. Could have just had that in the conversation. Maritza won the prize. I wonder why, blah, blah, blah. So Maritza won the prize is an embedded clause structure, and you can identify that. And notice that what is our main clause? Our main clause is consisting of the whole entire structure. That will always be the case. So the main clause always includes all of the material of the sentence. So here our main clause is John is jealous that Maritza won the prize. So notice that you could have had other words here, right? You could have had John is elated that Maritza won the prize. John is depressed that Maritza won the prize. The structure is going to be exactly the same. The only thing that you're doing is you're changing the adjective that you have there. So let's think about how we're going to provide the structure. First, you want to think about the embedded clause structure. Maritza won the prize is going to be comprised of subject and predicate. So our noun phrase, Maritza won the prize, is the predicate of that subject. And here we have our familiar complementizer, that. So we're going to label that as complementizer. And remember that the complementizer plus the embedded clause forms the S bar. Think of the S bar as being, in a sense, an enhanced sentence. It's a sentence plus a little bit more information. Jealous, we said, was an adjective. Well, how do we know that that's the case? John is very jealous that Maritza won the prize. So if you do that intensifier test, it seems to be possible, therefore you know it's not a verb. It's serving as an adjective. And therefore, these two guys together are forming an adjective phrase. Is the complete verb group. These are all of the verbs that we have here. It's just a single one, is. So your verb group is going to be is, and it's taking the adjective phrase as its complement. I have very little space here, but just enough to provide the structure of the sentence where John is the subject of the whole clause, forming the main clause with is jealous that Maritza won the prize. Okay? So basically the idea about adjective embedded clauses is that they're very similar to what you have when you have a verbal embedded clause. It's a verb taking a complement, which is itself a clause, or an adjective taking a complement, which is itself a clause. Okay, so we'll come back in a minute to talk about the last step of embedded clause, which is the sentential subject.